This panel should be a fun one. We're going to talk about the state of the conservative movement. I'll just say a few opening remarks here, and then I'll turn it over to each panelist for a brief few minutes of their opening remarks, and again, we'll follow the same format and go into questions and answers. The conservative movement is kind of at a crucial moment. I think we can all agree about that right now. I think there is some open question as to whether the movement can stick together. I mean, can we remain a movement that fuses together the various strains of conservatism? What's going to happen with the movement as we face a very populist moment in this country? Populism is not bad. Populism can be good. But populism needs to have a purpose, right? And I think what we're trying to do as conservatives is to embrace this populist moment and point it in a specific direction. And the direction that we have been talking about as conservatives is a direction that we've laid out in our bold policy agenda called Opportunity for All and Favoritism to None. We put that book out at the beginning of last year, where we outlined all of those different policies that we thought were the kinds of ideas that could bring the movement together. And we've been pushing those ideas and those themes in the Republican presidential primary. And so far, a lot of folks have embraced it. It's been good to see. Just briefly, it's no secret that the last decade has been a challenging one for the movement. We have seen the fraying of trust between the grassroots and the Republican Party. You could go back as far as 2003. You could look at the passage of the Medicare prescription drug bill under the promise that this was going to bring in permanent majorities for Republicans. You can look at the 2008 TARP vote. You can look at the growth of the federal government under GOP majorities, and all of this has kind of created an angst that has led to this populist moment. The good news, and I think you're hearing this today, the good news is that there are very real signs on the horizon that this is changing, and that there's a new future for conservatism in the Republican Party. Most recently, we had a change in Republican leadership, and I think that change was frequently recognized that there was a major force happening outside of Washington. So no matter what your opinion of Speaker Boehner, it was clear that he was indeed kind of a favorite of a lot of folks at the Chamber of Commerce or K Street. And they felt, that with him they had somebody that would deliver and make the trains run on time, and their interests would be protected. And he did indeed prove them right at the end of last year by passing the omnibus bill and reauthorizing the Export-Import Bank and things like that. But the only way he could do it was to step down. And I think that's significant because I think what is happening in the party is you have a new leadership team. We had Speaker Ryan here this morning who was singing from a different songbook, and he was talking about the need to unite the party around big, bold, conservative ideas. And we believe that is the way to unite the party as well. We all believe in these big, bold ideas. We're not afraid to have this conversation with the American people. We think that having the conversation with the American people is the predicate that's necessary for a referendum election. And a referendum election is necessary for a mandate, and a mandate is necessary if we're going to do the things that we need to do to turn the country back into the right direction. So we are in a very important moment. What we do in Congress this year in 2016 will echo into 2017 and far beyond. So the things that these members are working on are tremendously important and tremendously valuable. And we're at a moment, I also think, where we're reevaluating our relationship with the special interests in Washington, too. I mean, we just had a candidate in Iowa win by going against the ethanol mandate. I think that's good. It's good for the country that you can see that you actually can challenge special interests and you can be an unabashed conservative and people will reward you for it. So we want to see more of that in the presidential races. We want to see more of that in Congress, and we're very excited about where we are. So today we are joined by Dave Brat of Virginia, John Fleming of Louisiana, Bill Flores of Texas, Gary Palmer of Alabama, and Keith Rothfus of Pennsylvania, all fantastic conservatives who are working in the trenches in Congress. I'd like to turn it over to each of them individually for a couple of minutes of opening remarks, and then we'll go into questions. And we'll start with Mr. Fleming from Louisiana.
Okay, thank you, and good afternoon. Good to be here with you. What I would like to do just briefly is take you back to last time we balanced the budget it was actually under a Democrat president, a Republican Congress, Newt Gingrich and Contract for America and all of that. Then we ran into the Clinton scandals, and MoveOn.org got involved and really began to, I think, get into an anti-Republican sort of position. Then we had the hanging chads with the election of George W. Bush, which created a question of legitimacy in the minds of some, those who voted against him, of course. And along the way, when George Bush began to govern as president, he actually targeted a 3% deficit rate. Felt like that was, economists told him that you really actually do want to have a non-balanced budget. You actually want to have a small deficit. Unfortunately, we had two wars that arose, which were very expensive, and on top of that was economy that collapsed the housing market. So as a result of that, what did we get? We got Barack Obama and a complete control of Congress by the Democrat Party, and that's when I came in 2009. So what happened? The American people reacted against the stimulus bill, TARP, Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, cash for clunkers. They became very reactionary to that, and so they shouted out to us, please do something about that, and we said, okay, fine. Give the Republicans the majority in the House, and we will fix this problem. We will solve it, we'll stop it, we'll repeal Obamacare. Well, they gave us the majority in the House, and what happened? Nothing. So we said, well, it's a math problem. We need a bigger majority in the House, and we need a new majority in the Senate. So give us that, and everything will be fine. So you give us that, what happens? Nothing. So now we have huge pent-up frustration and anger, and that is what we now know manifested as the Trump effect. Trump is popular because of the frustration of American people, and as was mentioned earlier, there's a movement afoot even internally, vis-a-vis the House Freedom Caucus and others, that we're trying to respond to folks and say, look, we're going to have to stand up and fight a bit harder. We can't wait till we have both houses of Congress and the president. We may not get that for another decade. And meanwhile, we just hit the $19 trillion debt level. We know that Medicare A runs out of money in 9.5 years. We're going to have to do something. And as you know, foreign relations, defense, borders, all of this is suffering, and so is our standing among our friends and our enemies around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Congressman Brat.
Well, that summed it up pretty well. Good job. I always wait to hear what someone else is going to say to figure out what I'm going to say. So he gave a pretty good thematic overview of what's going on. The thesis for the day is what's the state of the conservative movement? And so you can view that in a couple ways. If you look at the numbers, I don't think there's any other conclusion you can draw than a negative one, right? So every number on the economics is looking pretty bad. I'll just give you a few, right? We got the $19 trillion in debt. You got $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities. I taught economics for 20 years. That's at the back of even Gruber, right? You all know Gruber. It's in his textbook, right? So you know it's got to be all right. That's Medicare, Social Security, the entitlements and mandatories. And that means what John was getting at, that in 11 years, all federal revenues will go only to mandatory spending and interest on the debt. Another way of saying that is in 11 years, there won't be $1 left for military spending, education, transportation, running government. Another way of saying that is 1/3 of the budget right now is discretionary and 2/3 is mandatory. In 11 years, the entire budget will be mandatory spending. So if you want any spending, you're going to have to do it out of deficit financing. Even worse, this year the deficit is increasing by $100 billion. Not $100 billion, it's increasing by $100 billion, first time under Republican leadership with both houses. So the deficit goes from 430, something like that, 430 billion to 530 billion, somewhere in that ballpark. By 2026, the deficit will be $1 trillion every year for the unforeseen future, according to the CBO. All this is CBO numbers, right? And so on and on and on. And education is the future, right? Is K-12 preparing, that is the next economy, right? Are those kids, are we preparing them to be globally competitive or not? or not. I taught them for 20 years, right? So K-12, they're not coming out and ready to go. So on the numbers, pretty pessimistic. The good news, I got to leave you with some good news, right? So the good news and the hope is there is a wave election coming, I think, for real, right? In Virginia, I ran, my district has, we had an Article 1 convention this morning with, not convention, but a meeting with Senator Mike Lee and Jeff Flake was there, a bunch of the House members, and we had a nice picture of the Philadelphia hall behind us with all the founders. And so on the hopeful note, people are getting back to those fundamentals, right? We want to get back to kind of the founding ideas, and there's good reason to think that's coming. In my district, I won a big victory a year ago, right, against Eric Cantor, and the grassroots swept over. That's nice, and I think, thank you, and that I think was just a preview of what's coming for the whole country, right? I think the American people are doing the math, they're catching up with the basic ideas, and that wave is coming. And so John kind of framed it from there. We got some challenges moving forward. We just had a budget, the omnibus, which the American people are just very upset with. It was called, crap sandwich, cleaning the barn, all sorts of negative stuff. In general, that's not good. So good news is the people are waking up, and the outside groups have been phenomenal. And that's where Heritage comes into play. They're making, the answer has to be on the politics, right? You're only going to get good representatives if the people demand that. And that's what I think is coming, right? So the people are waking up. Heritage is doing a fundamental job. The other outside conservative groups have helped us tremendously getting the word out. And then the news and the blogs are no longer a monopoly organization. And so I think there's good news on that front. So I just want to thank you all for what you're doing. And I'll just close on 1 year ago, did any of you know what regular order was? No. Yes? Really? Congratulations. That's very good. Good for you. Now you do. It's in the lexicon. The House Freedom Caucus and a bunch of other folks fought really hard for that to happen. Didn't spike the football in the end zone when we got a win on that. No one even knows we did it. I wish they did. But there's a little good news for you. That's a real substantive accomplishment that's going to help the budget process this year. And I'll end on that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Congressman. Congressman Flores.
So thank you, Tim. It's great to be here with Heritage. Heritage and our Republican Study Committee go way back. It was 43 years ago that the former president of Heritage, Ed Fullner, helped found the RSC. And since then, it's been a force for positive conservative change in the country. I think John and Dave have each done a great job of sort of laying out where we come from, also where we are today, and planted the seeds for where we go forward. So what I'd like to do is to help that seed germinate as we move along. The things that we need to focus on in Congress are the same things that the RSC focuses on, the same things the House Freedom Caucus focuses on. And those are the principles of economic freedom, national security, constitutionally limited government, and traditional family values. And so the question is, how do you get from here to there? And what's the tool set that you need? Well, I think, this panel is entitled, what's the state of the conservative movement? I think it's really strong. If you look at what happened in Iowa, and depending on how you classify the top four finishers, you could say that they were an insurgency movement. And that means that the state of the conservative movement is strong. If you look at what's happened in the House with the largest conservative majority we've ever had, if you look at the Senate with a Republican majority there, we're moving the right direction. We just have one big step to go. And so we need to work together. And so the things that the Republican Study Committee is going to be working on together, one is addressing the problem set that we have, working hard together, coming up with a solution set. And sometimes the solution sets are not the ones that our leadership agrees with. And so we're going to have to continue to stand up to leadership and work on those. But the most important thing we have to do as conservatives, we've got to work together. We've got to realize that we have a common enemy. And the common enemy are the purveyors of the liberal ideology. They're constantly fighting with us. We need to make sure that our focus is outward toward them and making sure the American people know that our solution set as conservatives beats the liberal solution set every day. And so I'd like to close with the words that Ronald Reagan said, because I think it's appropriate for what we have to do today. He had a charge to all of us And it said, and it actually applies in particular to those of us in this panel that work in the People's House. He said, on you depend the fortunes of America. Act worthy of yourselves. On you depend the fortunes of America. Act worthy of yourselves. And so we as conservatives need to act worthy of ourselves. And when we do this, we can beat the liberal ideology, and we can put forth the positive, bold solutions that lead us forward as conservatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Rothfus.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for having me, and it's good to see everybody here today, and thank Heritage for all the work that it has been doing. You've heard from John and Dave and outlining some of the challenges that we've had, and Bill trying to plant the seeds. I want to and germinate them. I want to try to water them a little bit with my thoughts. I've been thinking the last couple of days what I might say at a conference called The State of the Conservative Movement. And so necessarily I started reflecting on just some of the basic first principles, and I think it's helpful if we do that. Going back to some of our primary sources, Russell Kirk, and understanding where the conservative movement has been, including taking a look at some of the stuff that Russell Kirk was saying here 30 years ago. And I tried to define what is conservatism to me personally, and borrowing some from Kirk, it acknowledges a transcendent order, a natural law that establishes right and wrong and the existence of rights independent of the state. It involves a skepticism of state power and an aversion to those who believe that humanity is perfectible and who'd use all sorts of state power to achieve that perfection. And an evaluation of the state of the conservative movement should start with examining these concepts and measuring our successes in the debates that we have today. And we do have challenges ahead. State power is being used to limit freedom, notably in the areas such as healthcare, consumer choice with respect to financial services, education, and you can go on and on. The progressives believe that they can use state power to construct their view of utopia, which, given the human condition, is necessarily a wholly subjective and never-ending pursuit. The concept calls to mind President Reagan's inaugural address, where he warned that from time to time we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. Notably, the latest and clearest assault on conservative principles by the left involves those aimed at the transcendent order. Kirk suggests that the order rules both society, that natural law and rules both society as well as conscience. Our founders recognized that order and recognized the concept of natural rights and being endowed by those rights by a creator. That is why the outcome of cases such as the Zubik case, which is going to be litigated before the Supreme Court in March, and the coming impact of the Supreme Court's marriage decision are vital to conservatism. Moving into the future, the conservative movement should reaffirm the foundational principles that serve to check the concentration of power in the hands of the elite here in Washington, D.C., recognizing that the lead candidates for president for the Democratic Party are committed progressives who believe in this overwhelming state power. Indeed, one of them describes himself as a socialist, makes it imperative that we win the debate of ideas this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Good job. Congressman Palmer.
Thanks for having me. This panel was here last year, and I love the work of Heritage Foundation. I have a 25-year history with them. So what I want to talk about in terms of the state of the conservative movement, is this on?
It is.
Yeah. There you go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
No?
A little closer.
How about that?
Yeah,
Okay,
that'll work.
I'll just shout. All right, is this any better? Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what it means when they give the guy the microphone that doesn't work. Okay. Reclaiming my time. Let me talk about what we have. I really think what we have, Reagan would have envied. We have a national network of state-based think tanks that did not exist when Ronald Reagan was president. We've got state-based think tanks in all 50 states. We've got family policy councils. We've got an enormous network. Their combined budgets are somewhere north of $130, $140 million. Can you imagine what Reagan would have done if he had had that? And I can tell you what he wouldn't have done. He wouldn't have tried to take it over. He would have taken advantage of it, but he would have done it without taking it over. And I know that because he worked so closely with the Heritage Foundation. There was that working relationship, but they maintained their independence. So we also have a network now of national organizations, many of whom that didn't were just fledgling when Reagan was in office. Among those was Heritage. Heritage was founded, what, 1978? Somewhere in that range. We've also got organizations focused on grassroots organizing, candidate recruitment and training that did not exist in 1980. And then we've got National Talk Radio now, and which is very important, except on those days when they eat their own. But here's the thing that we miss, and I think as members of Congress we miss this a lot, is local talk radio, local conservative talk radio. We get up here in this insulated environment and we think that the only media that matters is inside the Beltway, when that may be the only media that doesn't matter. I mean, in the big picture of things. Look what happened in Iowa. If all the Iowans were paying attention to the inside the Beltway media, I don't think Cruz would have won that race. So we need to take better advantage of local media, and particularly local talk radio. I'll tell you something else that we have that Reagan didn't have. We have the majority of governors. And I'm not talking just Republican governors. We have conservative governors. We've got conservative attorney generals. And we have the majority of state legislatures. And as members of Congress and the conservative movement, we need to do a better job of taking advantage of that. What we need more involvement by these state-based organizations. Rachel Kopak, I was on the founding board of the State Policy Network, chaired that board. Rachel worked for the SPN, State Policy Network. She put together a conference call back in November, December, in a first attempt to try to communicate with these local groups to get them more focused on what we're trying to do up here on things that matter. And there were 61 participated, I think at least 61 on that call. We need more engagement with the local media, just like I was talking about. We need more ideas and solutions as members of Congress that we are committed to, not talking points, things that we will do. We need to take the fight to the left. We need to take the fight to the Obama administration. It's interesting, now I haven't checked this out, but one of the members told me the most popular committee in Congress is the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. And he said the reason it is because they see us as fighting back. So what I think we need, if we really want to get the conservative movement behind us, is to take on the hard things. People will respond to and support courage. They know it when they see it. It's not a talking point. And we have to show it. I think Iowa may very well be predictive of this election. As one of the guys mentioned, you had a guy win that caucus out there even though he was against the ethanol mandate. That was a courageous stand. I mean, that cost him votes, but the people rallied behind it. We need to show what we're for. We need to take on the hard things. We need to give people a vision for how we'll get our country back on track, be honest about what it's going to cost. We need to let them know what they can expect from us, and when we do that, we can let people know what we should expect from them. And I think when we do, I think they'll rally to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Okay, I know there are a lot of questions on this topic, so let's just go straight to questions.
I have to beg forgiveness from the group because I'm apparently I contribute just enough to Heritage that they tolerate my repeated questions. I'm going to try this one again and suggest that what you gentlemen need is leverage. And to Congressman Palmer's point, you can enliven the states and the people in the states by an Article 5 convention, and it comes issue by issue. The last time it was tried, it was called the Balanced Budget Amendment. South Dakota was the first in 1975. Missouri was the 32nd to apply to Congress in 1983, Graham Rudman stole its thunder. That movement gave leverage and caused Congress to act. This morning, Congressman Ryan said that he would, that you guys have got a proposal to take one of Mark Levin's amendments. He wrote his book in 13, that if you could do a bill, it goes to the bureaucracy, it's got to be reapproved after the bureaucracy. So the question is, can you encourage that? It would be good for you, give you leverage.
Thoughts?
Encourage what exactly? Constitutional convention? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
that's what he's saying, yeah.
To talk up and promote the idea of a kind of convention of states, or
Yeah,
five convention of states, issue by issue.
Constitutional convention, does it give you guys leverage? How do you guys feel about it?
We'll start. Sorry.
I don't think it gives us leverage, and what happens, and this, going back to the balanced budget amendment, when that 32nd state signed on, Congress acted like they were serious about a balanced budget amendment. All of the momentum was lost, and Congress didn't act on it. We've had a lot of discussions about an Article 5 convention. I actually wrote an article along with a justice on the Alabama Supreme Court about amending the 10th Amendment to clearly define the limits of executive power and clearly define the limits between federal power and state power. There's a lot of things we can do, but if you're asking Congress to apply leverage, I mean, under Article 5, as you well know, Congress could call a constitutional convention or could amend it.
Other thoughts?
Again, I think that's something that organically that develops from the states. I've had people in my district ask about it, and I'm certainly sympathetic when you see gridlock in Washington, D.C. There are tools out there that the founders put into the Constitution, and I think that's something that has to develop organically from the people in the states.
I tend to agree with Keith, and also with Gary, but I would add that we need to make sure that the agenda doesn't run away from us. I mean, otherwise you wind up with things that conservatives absolutely don't want. And so, I mean, if we want to focus on balanced budgets and term limits and redefining the state-federal relationship, I think those are all laudable goals. We just need to make sure that it doesn't go too much farther.
Right. We have one question right here. Yep.
On the question of leverage, say we win the White House, we have the House and Senate, aren't we still going to run up against the Senate, whose leadership has essentially folded their hand before the game even starts? If there's anything that possibly could shut down the government, aren't we right back to where we are? Have we been the last, say, several years since Reid? Schumer's not going to give you 60, so where do you guys go? How do you get around that obstacle?
Well, let me start, if you don't mind. This is one of the frustrations that several of us in the House have. Now, I don't know, I'm assuming it's universal on this panel, but I can't speak for the other four guys. But with the filibuster, you've got a 19th century rule holding up solution sets for a 21st century problem. And there's nothing in the Constitution about the filibuster. And I know that many senators would like to retain that, but I do believe that it is a source of immense frustration for the American people, and as a result, it's a source of immense frustration for us. If you look at what we in the House have done in the last 5 years to see it, which hadn't been perfect, but it's been a lot better than what you've seen come out of Washington as a whole, I think a reassessment of that rule could change the dynamic in a material manner for the betterment of this country.
Yeah, let me address leverage, because there's some things I found when I got to Washington that I didn't know. I didn't study this in school. We hear about the media being the fourth branch of government. Well, there is a fifth branch of government. It's called the bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. The bureaucracy is running Washington. You have people who are unelected. They don't take your phone call. They're in, behind desks someplace, and they're writing laws and enforcing the laws. And Congress cannot stop them. And there's a reason, because Congress has abdicated its power to the executive branch. And, we complain about President Obama and his executive orders, but that's not nearly as bad. I'll give you an example, the waters of the U.S. Rolling out completely from the regulatory process. So the biggest laws that are being passed and the nastiest laws that are being passed are coming from the regulatory bodies. And what we do is we try to chip away at these big things through our appropriations bills, and we lose most of the time. So it is completely shifted from the legislative body to the bureaucracy that was never intended. And this really manifested when Harry Reid went into freeze mode and refused to pass anything. And that's still happening today, still blocking things. Why? Because that gives the president more power. And we actually made it worse by ending earmarks. All the earmarks now come out of the executive branch. So we're going to have to change a lot when it comes to the bureaucracy and the regulatory atmosphere before we're ever going to get that power back.
And I'll pile on to this leverage thing. I talked to Bernie Sanders at the White House Christmas party. So that was a fun. I said, Bernie, I said, hey, I'm not putting you on the spot. I honestly am just asking you this question. I said, I've been only up here for a year. Everyone characterizes the fights up here between the right and the left. I said, in my experience so far this year, that is not where the fight is. I said, for me, the fight is in the middle. All the votes in the middle that are voting for $3.5 trillion budgets to every special interest up here in the city. And that's where it's hard to extract leverage, right? If you have, and that's where Paul Ryan is the new speaker. It's not about personalities. That person has $3.5 trillion a year in special interests hanging over his head like bricks, right, that are going to come down on him no matter what he does. And that's why the only thing that can outweigh that much power is the people. And so it's just absolutely crucial that you guys pile on politically in order to outweigh that special interest power. But John, you framed it right up.
If I could just make one point about the Senate, Kemp Roth passed without 60 Republican senators. So there is a way to do that. If we have a chief executive who can take it to the American people and encourage them and have a winsome argument and present it, things can get done.
Indeed. Okay, we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Heather Cordasco. I'm one of the Heritage Action Sentinels. I'm from Virginia and have learned so much. And you guys are giving great information, and I want to say thank you for everything you're doing. Here's my question. We talked about media. We talked about local media. We didn't talk a lot about social media, and a lot can be done in social media. How can we help you? Do you want us to follow your Twitter feeds? Do you want everybody, I mean, people in this room are like Twitter. Twitter really works. People pay a lot of attention to Twitter. Kids get their news from Twitter and from other things. So how can we best help you to get this message out to the people so then they can be active?
Thank you. Who wants to take that?
You want us all to tell you our Twitter accounts? I'd be happy to, so.
What's the best way?
Go ahead.
I think, well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I think Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram are all great ways to do it. And mine's Rep Bill Flores on all three of them, so rock on.
I would suggest that Twitter is primarily a way we speak to the media, short bursts of information, sound bites. We don't really end up communicating a lot with our constituency that way. Facebook a little bit more. But as all-encompassing as social media is, you really can't use it as a real strong campaign device. We still have to go to old technologies like knocking on doors and teletown halls and town halls and those sort of things. It hasn't overcome that. You can't win an election just on social media.
Other questions?
Let me respond
Sorry,
to
go
that
ahead.
on the social media very quickly. It is, I left it off my list, and that's an oversight on my part as I was jotting these things down. But it is another way that you talk about the things you're doing. I don't really concern myself with this in a campaign context. I'm thinking about it in terms of how do we inspire the American public, from the youth to the senior citizens, to get behind a movement to get our country back.
Well said.
Sure.
Mike Spangler from Pennsylvania, and thank you. So, you know, something was mentioned this morning that struck me, which was a cultural issue that I think you're facing in the conservative movement. Arthur Brooks, in his book, The Conservative Heart, mentioned this. He said, you know, the conservatives have the best policies, proven fact. You go anywhere in the world, you know that you see those are, but he said what we don't have is we don't have the trust of the people. And I think that is trumps everything else that is happening in the Republican Party and the conservative movement. I know it trumps everything. Culture trumps everything in business. I don't think it's any different in government. What can we do? What can you guys do to build trust?
Good question. Who'd like to take it?
Let me say this. Let me start with one example. I mean, when you elected the wave class in 2010, you expected Obamacare to be repealed. We expected Obamacare to be repealed. And we put up 50-some-odd votes and weren't terribly successful. But finally, we were able to get into a situation where we could use reconciliation. And now you can see that the American people know clearly that with the Congress you have today and with a different president, you can repeal Obamacare. And so I think all but one of the candidates on our side of the aisle said that they would sign that bill if we sent it to them. So I think that's something to show you that we can make progress. Now, there are lots of other examples, but I think that's one tangible one that shows down. We lost the veto override vote yesterday, but we wouldn't have had to have it if you'd have had the right chief executive in the White House.
I'll just comment on the trust issue. I taught ethics and economics for 20 years, and the Conservative Party, we do not do a good job of bringing up the fundamental values and virtues at all, right? I mean, I got in terrible trouble. I got in trouble on one of the Sundays. I said, we own the tradition, right? The Judeo-Christian tradition. And I said that in the context of the Democrats at the last convention ejected God from their Democrat convention. Of course, they left off that footnote, right? So all of these words, trust and compassion and whatever, come out of a particular tradition at a certain time, and we don't own that. One of the candidates these days is showing this populism works. We're scared of the voters. Right, we're scared of women voters. We're scared we're going to lose the Hispanic voters. We're scared of African American voters. The Hispanic community is overwhelmingly Catholic. The African American community is overwhelmingly Judeo-Christian tradition. Right? I mean, that's our forte. Everyone speaks the same language, but if you're scared of the voters, you lose. And so I think we got to get our confidence back on the trust, and then people will go, "Hey, they're talking my language again." And when you talk their language, you win. And just as a footnote, if you ever want to look up Deidre McCloskey, she's a trip. But a world-famous economist, her thesis is the cause of long-run economic growth that started in about 1800 is when, for the first time in history, the business class determined that they were morally good, right? That business is morally good. And if you look at all human history prior, that was not true, right? Business was at best paid for nice artwork, et cetera. Right? So we own and understand what that means, right? Connecting business, a meaningful life, values, religion, the tradition together. And so Heritage knows about the three-legged stool. That's right. And so hats off to you. Keep up the good work on it.
Well, just to kind of add on to something I said earlier, what happened back in the early 2000s, remember that the modern Democrat Party has shifted completely to what is really merging into the Socialist Party. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders almost won the other night. He is an avowed Democratic Socialist. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was asked twice, what's the difference between a Democrat, and this was by a liberal now that asked her the question, what's the difference between a Democrat and a Socialist? She could not answer. She couldn't give a coherent answer. And so the modern Democrat Party is already over there. What makes people mad is they go, Democrats are Democrats. We get it. We know who they are. They're very transparent about who they are. But we depend on you Republicans, you conservatives, to change that because we are a center-right nation. And so that's why the anger is oftentimes pointed at us. We have not been successful in stopping the socialist movement.
Other perspectives on that?
I'd like to say something about that, about the trust thing, and I think it starts with what we have in common. We have let the left divide us. They've divided us on race, they've divided us on income, but we have so much more in common. We have our religious values in common. We have in common a nation that our children and grandchildren are going to inherit. So we need to start with what we have in common, and then we need to add to that and build on that trust that comes from people seeing what we're personally willing to risk. Because courage is not taught, caught, or bought. It's demonstrated, and it comes up from your character. That's what will lead you to do something that may cost you the next election or may lead a young soldier to take a bullet for the guy next to him. It comes from your character.
Amen. Okay, well, gentlemen, I'm sorry to say that we are out of time. Please join me in thanking the panel. Thank you all for being here. And I'd invite Russ Bode up to come moderate the next panel.